Marijuana guy.
So this card is fucking stacked. Great fights and future title contenders all over the place. Makhachev is on the card, Caio Borralho, Armen Petrosian. Just the prelims portion would make for a very nice fight night card. Over on the main card, you got some very important fights. Manon Fiorot will be taking on Caitlin Chookagian for the #1 contender spot. I think she should easily outclass Chookagian on the feet and thwart any takedowns coming her way. Sadly, I don't see her presenting any real danger to the champ Shevchenko, though I may be wrong on that since Shevchenko looked terrible in her last fight. You also got Sean O'Malley taking a gigantic leap in competition, fighting the #1 contender and former champion Petr Yan, which is going to be very interesting. I'm gonna start off with essentially a mirror match between two very well-rounded grapplers, Belal Muhammad and Sean Brady. So right off the bat, I think Belal Muhammad should do his best to keep this fight on the feet and just try to disengage anytime Brady tries to initiate a grappling exchange. Now he might not need to because we really haven't seen Brady's takedown defense get tested, and actually we have seen him get taken down a few times here and there. So it's entirely possible for Belal to go out there and dominate him through his wrestling alone, like he did to Luque and Wonderbread. On the other hand, we have seen Belal's takedown defense get tested against a pretty strong wrestler in Demian Maia. And while he did a great job defending the single leg takedowns, he did get taken down multiple times by the double legs of Maia. The way that he got double-legged in that fight is very much like Sean Brady takes people down. He drives them towards the cage, he locks his hands together and just dumps them, no matter how much resistance his opponents put up. He's just too strong. And once Brady gets people to the ground, he immediately starts working on getting their back and choking them out. He's also great at tripping his opponents and putting them back down whenever they try to get up. The strength differential between them might be a bit too much for Belal to handle, at least for the first 2 rounds. And just objectively speaking, Brady is far more dangerous on the ground. He did beat Craig Jones in submission grappling, even though it was a modified no leg locks match. On the feet is where it looks a lot better for Belal, because he has a definitive advantage when it comes to movement. His head movement is better, he has much better footwork, at least defensively, to get away from his opponents, which will be useful to get away from those big blitzes from Brady. And more importantly is experience. He's been in there with the cream of the crop strikers of the division, like Wonderbread, like Luque, Jeff Neal and Leon Edwards. The best striker that Brady faced was Ismail Naurdiev, and he was losing that fight until he started wrestling. With that said, Sean Brady is much more powerful, probably a bit faster than Belal. He has pretty good defense too, or at least he tends to be defensively aware. His only undoing is that he's mostly a one-shot fighter. His best weapon in this fight is going to be the outside leg kick when Belal goes orthodox, because he never checks leg kicks, and he's gonna need to switch it to a body kick when Belal goes southpaw. Another thing is, he's gotta dial back those blitzes a bit, which will leave him open to getting taken down and probably get him tired earlier, and he needs to focus on landing counter shots. We haven't seen much of his counter striking, but we have seen him do some good work with his left hook. It's how he dropped Court McGee, and he landed it a few times on Naurdiev and Chiesa. There's a lot more to unpack here. I could really make a 20-minute video about this fight alone. A big X factor coming into this is the fact that Belal has been doing some training with Khabib and Islam's crew, which should give him plenty of grappling practice. And I think he's also really worked on his upper body grappling, his trips and throws, because Belal's usual means of getting people down is almost always a single or double leg. With all that said though, I'm gonna go with Belal Muhammad by decision. I see it being a really tough, grindy fight. I see him getting taken down and roughed up a bit by Brady, but I think his activity is gonna win him the fight, especially in the 3rd round, where Brady tends to slow down and Belal can start picking it up. Next up, we got 2 of the best strikers at bantamweight. The #1 ranked former champ Petr Yan taking on the #12 ranked Sean O'Malley. I truly don't understand why this fight is even happening. I get they had a little Twitter back and forth a few years ago, but even so, I think fighting Merab or Chito Vera would make far more sense ranking wise. Nevertheless, I'm not gonna go too in depth with this one because I think we all know Petr Yan is gonna have his way with Sean. He's the better boxer, he is all around better defensively, he has vicious leg kicks, which O'Malley doesn't check effectively. He's also a very strong wrestler, he doesn't have the best single legs or double legs, but his trips are a work of art, and you saw that on full display against Aljamain Sterling the first time around. Jan was actually the first guy to ever take Jimmy Rivera down in a fight. Not even Aljamain Sterling or Uriah Faber could take him down. About the only things riding for Sean O'Malley is his boxing and his physical attributes. His power, his length. He is a very sharp and accurate boxer. He has great combinations and he's good at making fighters overextend with his constant feints and unorthodox movements, then countering them effectively. Still, this is nothing new to Jan. He trains with all kinds of strikers from all kinds of backgrounds at Tiger Muay Thai. The only thing I see that spells trouble for him is the fact that this is a 3-round fight, meaning he'll have a shorter time to download the data. But this issue is massively overblown. People are letting his last few fights with Sterling and Sandhagen cloud their judgment. In every other 3-round fight, he has completely brutalized his opponents with only a minor hiccup when he got knocked down by John Dodson. Even against elite competition, he's able to get going in the early rounds, even if he spent the majority of it getting beaten up. You can see this when he dropped Sterling in the first round after looking like he was just getting overwhelmed by his activity. You could see it when he nearly finished Aldo after a very competitive first round. You could see it when he dropped Rivera at the tail end of both the first and the second round. There's just too much riding against O'Malley in this one. He's less experienced, he's not as well rounded, he can absolutely make it competitive on the feet, but he has to find an opportunity to find a finish early, because the further the fight goes, the more dangerous Jan is gonna be. And as I said before, the wrestling will be there for Jan. So I'm gonna go with Petr Yan, and I'm gonna go by TKO in the 3rd round. I think it's gonna be a body shot that does it. I see him investing early in the body, and that's just gonna take its toll the further they get into the fight. At long last, Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. It feels like we've waited an eternity for this fight. I remember all the way back in July, people were making their breakdowns and predictions. The fight is officially made for the vacant lightweight title, but for all intents and purposes, this is Oliveira's 3rd title defense. So to start with, Oliveira will have the advantage on the feet. He is just much sharper and much more precise with everything he throws. But his strongest weapon in this fight is going to be his pressure and his counter-striking. Islam doesn't deal very well with pressure, and coincidentally, he's fighting probably the most pressuring fighter in this entire division. When Islam has his way with his opponents, when he gets to set the pace, he's very, very solid defensively. He's also got good fundamentals, rarely overextending or leaving openings to be exploited. However, that changes a bit when he is being pressured or being forced to react and respond to strikes. Islam's blessing and curse on the feet is that he's very fundamentally solid, but that also leaves him to be very predictable. His attacks are usually singular, but even when he throws combinations, they're very predictable. It's always something like a 1-2 or a 3-4, stuff like that. It's definitely nothing that Charles hasn't seen before. Keep in mind, he trains at Shoot the Box Academy. They are known for doing a lot of sparring, a lot of hard sparring especially. Oliveira's path of least resistance should be to pressure forward and just keep prodding Islam with light strikes to get him to respond and then counter him when he does. However, Islam has 2 big things riding for him on the feet. First of all, Oliveira's hands are going to be tight on the feet. One of his means of pressuring forward is to throw a lot of kicks and flying attacks. But doing so, Oliveira will be wide open to getting taken down. I'm pretty sure he himself knows this, which means he's not going to be throwing many teeps or kicks in this fight, which means he can't be quite as pressuring as he usually is. And as good of a grappler as Oliveira is, the worst place he can be is on his back, with Islam on top. And Islam isn't gonna hesitate for a second to go to the ground with Oliveira, because he has done so in the past with elite BJJ grapplers like Davi Ramos and Thiago Moises. But more on this later. Now, just like Islam is more susceptible when being heavily pressured, the same goes for Oliveira. His mentality is to always be first, and you can kinda see why. When he is leading the dance, he really feels free and he can let his creativity come through in his combinations. But on the back foot, he just can't do that. Now that's not to say Oliveira isn't dangerous even while being pressured, because he is. He has knocked people out moving backwards in the past. And the same can happen with Islam if he starts lunging and overextending. When it comes to wrestling, however, it's a completely different story. Islam is the better wrestler by a country mile. Not only is he the better wrestler, But Oliveira's guillotine trap that he loves to set by constantly raising and extending his lead leg, Islam can bypass this completely through his upper body takedowns, his trips, his throws, and mat returns. And on the ground is where Oliveira is going to be in the most trouble, I think, because Islam is incredibly solid on top. Usually he likes to fight to advance to a position where he can start raining down punches and elbows or to get a submission. However, against great ground grapplers, he tends to stay in one position, usually full guard, and just wear his opponent down by making them work and softening them up with punches. And there needs to be an emphasis on ground and pound for Islam, because whenever Oliveira starts getting hit on the ground, he kind of starts panicking. You could see this happen in his older fights. You can also see it happen in recent fights, like against Michael Chandler. And I don't see Oliveira sweeping Islam either because he's got such a solid base. But one thing I can see happening, because he's done this in the past against Kevin Lee, I can see Oliveira going for a lot of leg locks. Even if he doesn't get them, he can use this to off-balance Makhachev and maybe eventually sweep him or cause a scramble to get on top or take his back. There is one last thing I want to bring up, and that's Charles Oliveira's offensive wrestling, which is extremely underrated. His double legs are pretty explosive, but where he shines is in the over-under position. He's incredibly strong there. I think he could definitely get him to the ground from that position. And in Islam's fight with Thiago Moises managed to lift him up and dump him on the ground, and Islam's immediate reaction was to turn his back to stand back up. There was another very disconcerting thing that Islam kept doing in that fight, where he kept overextending, getting too far in, which allowed Moises to easily get double unders and drive him to the cage. If he does this against Oliveira, he's 100% gonna get slammed. I could also absolutely see a scenario where Oliveira rocks Islam, puts him against the cage, gets him to expose his back after taking him down, and ends it all with a rear naked choke. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna go with Islam Makhachev. Javier Mendez has very heavily alluded that this is going to be a grappling fight. He wants Islam to take Oliveira down and dominate him. I see Islam taking Oliveira down, controlling him and making him tired by constantly working to eventually finish him in the 4th or 5th round. So that was it for the breakdown, guys. There are a few other great fights on the card that I didn't have enough time to cover. There's of course the title fight between Sterling and Dillashaw. I think Sterling's gonna get Dillashaw's back and choke him out probably in the 3rd round. Dillashaw is a great wrestler, but he's never faced this type of grappler. Someone who doesn't even really need to get the fight to the ground to finish it. A big part of Dillashaw's arsenal, namely his big head kicks and some of his footwork patterns, are gonna get taken away from him because of the takedown threat. Dillashaw has also taken some long layoffs, you know, the EPO suspension, and he's been on the couch for some time because of a knee surgery after the Sandhagen fight. There's just too much riding against Dillashaw for me to see him winning this. Mateusz Gamrot versus Beneil Dariush is going to be an excellent fight. These guys are so damn evenly matched. Judging by their last performances, I'm really leaning towards Gamrot because of his wrestling and his past fights with great BJJ grapplers like Kleber Herbst and Mansour Barnoui. I think he's also got the striking advantage, as Beneil is very wild and pretty chinny, but at the same time Dariush is absolutely unrelenting with his pressure and his wrestling. It's going to be a very interesting fight. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.